Welcome. Today's lesson is going to be about multiplying and dividing fractions or rational numbers. Before we get into that, though, I want to do a very quick review of our signs when it comes to multiplication. Remember that a positive times a positive is going to always be a positive. A positive times a negative will be negative. And vice versa. If the first one's negative and the second one's positive, it'll still be negative. And then this is probably the more important one. A negative times a negative will be positive. As an example, 4 times 3 is 12. Negative 7 times 8 would be negative 56. And negative 5 times a negative 3 would be a positive 15. Those rules apply with fractions as well. So now let's get doing some fractions. So let's make sure we just remember the basic rules of multiplying fractions. If I have a fraction like 2/3 and I times it by 5/7, don't confuse this with addition. We do not need a common denominator. In general, we just have to multiply the numerators together, the top times the top, which gives us 10, over, and then we multiply the bottoms together, or the denominators. 3 times 7 is 21. So remember, the top is the numerator, the bottom is the denominator, and we just multiply straight across. Then we look at this fraction and see if it reduces. We always got to make sure, is there any common factors between 10 and 21? And there is not, so we're actually done. This is also not an improper fraction. The top is smaller than the bottom, so it wouldn't be able to convert it into a mixed number. Let's do another one. And I'm going to keep this one very simple. I'm going to go 3/4 times 5/3 and equals. Now, again, a lot of students are just going to go top times top, which gives us the 15, over bottom times bottom, which is going to give us 12. And then we ask, is there any common factors in between 15 and 12? In other words, does it reduce, right? Because we always got to try to reduce if possible. And it does. It has a factor of 3. So I divide by 3, I divide by 3, and I get 5/4. Again, this could be represented as 1 1/4. But the improper fraction is perfectly fine. I recommend just leave it as the improper fraction, as going to a mixed number is one more step and one more chance to make a simple mistake. But if you like the mixed numbers, you may absolutely go to a mixed number and be perfectly fine. Either of these work. Now, I want to go back to this reducing. We can actually do that before we multiply. It's called cross-canceling. Cross-canceling. Now, I don't want you to confuse that with multiplying when there's an equal sign. There's no equal sign in between these two fractions, but cross-canceling means if there's a factor on the top of the one and a factor on the bottom of the other that match up, we can actually cancel that way. So this 3 I could have canceled beforehand with this 3, and then it's just 1 times 5 to give us the 5 over here, and 4 times 1 to give us the 4. That's called cross-canceling. Now let's quickly talk about mixed numbers. Mixed numbers, we got to be very careful with mixed numbers when it comes to multiplying. We cannot do it as a mixed number. So let's do -4 1/2 times 1 1/2. Now, when it comes to multiplication and when we get to division, we have to convert these to improper fractions. So remember, the way we do that is we take the whole number and multiply it by the denominator. So 4 times 2 is 8, and we add the numerator. So the 4 times 2 is 8, plus the 1 is 9. So we get 9/2. That is negative. Now I want to emphasize, did you notice how I did not even look at the negative until once I converted? A very easy mistake to make is thinking the 4 is negative, so you go -4 times 2 is -8, but then you look, oh, the 1 must be positive, so when you add a +1 to -8, you get -7, which you would be incorrect. this whole fraction's negative, or this whole mixed number's negative. So even though there's not a negative here, this negative in front makes the fraction of 1/2 negative as well. So don't make that mistake or that common error of adding a positive 1 to a negative 8. That's why I just don't even look at the negative until I've converted it to an improper fraction. Let's do the same thing to the next fraction. 1 times 2 is 2, plus the 1 is 3, so that becomes 3/2 times. Now I have a negative fraction and a positive fraction, so a negative times a positive will be negative. I have 9 times 3 is 27. 2 times 2 is 4. There is no common factors, so I can just leave it as a negative 27/4. But again, if you like the improper fractions, 4 goes into 27, I believe, 6 times. So we'll have a negative 6 and 3/4. 4 times 6 is 24, which is 3 short of the 27. So I could have looked here to notice that, and in fact I did, 2 doesn't go into 9, 2 doesn't go into 3, so there was no ability to cross cancel, so there was no factors when I multiplied. Let's now look at division really quickly. With division, let's take 1/8 divided by 1/4. Now when we divide, we can't ever really divide. We actually have to convert this second fraction and turn it to a multiplication. So what we do is leave the first fraction alone. So you keep the first fraction alone, and then you change the division symbol to a multiplication, and you flip the second fraction, 4/1. Now we're going to multiply. 1 times 4 is 4. 2 times 1 is 2. There's a common factor of 2. That actually just reduces to 2. I could have looked back here and said, oh, 2 goes into 4 twice. That leaves a 1. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. You don't need to write it as 2/1. You can just write it as 2. Both fractions were positive, so my product will be positive. I'm just checking to make sure my signs are right. But remember, keep the first fraction alone, keep it the way it is, change the division to multiplication, and then flip the second fraction. Always the second. Don't flip both, and don't flip the first. Let's do another one. This time, let's do a mixed number. So again, if I give you a negative 6 3/8 divided by a negative 6, and that's just a negative 6, that's all right. Even though you don't see any fraction part, we're going to convert it to a fraction. But let's first move to here, and we go, all right. So again, I ignore this minus sign for a minute. I'm just going to convert this to an improper fraction. 6 times 8 is 48, because remember the whole part times the denominator added to the numerator. So 6 times 8 is 48, plus the 3 will be 51 over 8. Now I replace the negative, just to remind myself that it's a negative fraction. I'm going to leave this division alone for just a minute, because I don't want to get confused as I'm converting this. I'm going to convert this to a mixed number, or to an improper fraction, and luckily it's a very simple improper fraction. It's 6/1. So just remember, if you have a whole number and you need to make it look like a fraction, just put it over 1. Now I'm going to keep the first one the way it is as a negative 51 over 8, change the division to multiplication, and flip this one. So it's going to be a negative 1 over 6. So I flip the second one. Now when I multiply, I realize that the negative times the negative will be positive. So right off the bat, the negatives cancel. Now I can do 51 times 1, that's 51, over 8 times 6, that's 48. And now I'm going to look to see if it reduces. I actually notice back here that 6 has a factor of 3, and so does 51. I would have went back here and divided by 3 to get 2, divided by 3 to get, I believe it's 117. And so if you divide 51 by 3, you're going to get 17. If you divide 48 by 3, you're going to get 8 times 2, or you're going to get 16. 8 times 2 is 16, right? And again, the negative and this negative cancel, leaving it a positive. There's your final solution. The top is heavy, so if you wanted to convert it to 1 and 1/16, you're more than welcome to, but you do not have to. So just remember, when it comes to division, and multiplication, convert all your mixed numbers to improper fractions. When you're dividing, flip the second one. Once you have it to multiplication, multiply straight across, numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. If you're comfortable cross-canceling, do so. If not, at the end, look for common factors to see if it reduces. You can leave your answer as a improper fraction, or you can convert it to a mixed number. And that's today's lesson.